والله ما يكون شيخ يكون لا
السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأفضل الصلاة والتسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد. So we ended last week speaking about the benefits of dhikr, and I mentioned that Ibn Qayyim rahmatullahi alayhi had mentioned 100 benefits in his book Al-Wabil al-Sayyid, and we went through some of them. I just want to make a few more observations and share a few more fawaid about dhikr, inshallah, but this time in the context of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam as the best of the dhakirin, as the best of those who made remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So going back to Ibn Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, but this time in Zad al-Ma'ad, which is his famous book about the Sunnah and about the Prophet. He says, the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam was of the most perfect character in terms of the remembrance of Allah Azza wa Jal, but rather all of his speech was a remembrance of Allah or something associated with it. All of his speech was a remembrance of Allah or something associated with it. All of his commands, his prohibitions, and his legislation, when he said something that eventually became as an articulation of the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the ummah, it was all remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on his part. When he spoke to people and informed them about the names of Allah and his attributes and his commands and his actions, his promises and his warnings, it was all his remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, either by remembering his signs or him praising him and exalting him by declaring Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala pure, by making tasbih and saying subhanallah, by saying alhamdulillah and so on. This was all him remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and made dua to him, and desired something from him, or felt in awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this was also a form of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When he was silent and wasn't speaking, this was remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his heart. And this goes back to that hadith we spoke about last week, that he was always remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in all of his uh, moments and in every condition. So his remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala flowed with every breath, whether standing, whether sitting, whether lying on his side, whether walking, whether riding, whether he was in motion or moving during travel, whether he was dismounting from a ride, whether he was settled or whether he was traveling. In all of these conditions, he was remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is Ibn al-Qayyim rahmatullahi alayhi's description of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam as a dhakir, as the best of those who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we go on, there's a lot to be said about, and there's a lot of controversy as well around questions around dhikr when we move into how different groups engage in it, right? But I don't really want to go into that. So there's discussions among the fuqaha or among the ulama around whether it is permissible to make dhikr loud, or does dhikr always have to be in a quiet voice. There's different practices in the name of dhikr that involve physical movements. In some places, like I've seen in places like Syria, where they do something called the hadra, where they stand and there's this physical motions that they attach to the dhikr, and they associate certain benefits and meanings to those things. These are all things that I suppose I'm just going to leave to people to kind of look into for themselves. I won't go into trying to arbitrate these issues from a fiqh perspective. I think what's important is that people are not doing dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It isn't something that preoccupies us. It isn't something that we spend much time doing. You don't see many people of the younger generations walking around with a sibha, doing dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as many of you might have seen your parents and elders, grandparents do. And some people might not walk around with a sibha because they think it's bid'ah. But if you observe carefully, you'll notice that that's for a lot of people. That whole conversation around the sibha, the beads, around the beads being a bid'ah, has just resulted in a lot of people not doing dhikr. Some people have been able to do it without the sibha. The sibha was a big physical instigator of dhikr. People had this habit of carrying it around. It was something that people gave to each other as a gift when they felt it in their pocket. For at least, even if it's for a few moments, they made tasbih, and so on. And other people became dependent on it, and carried it all the time. It was hanging from walls in homes, from ornaments and so on, from bedposts. It hung from hooks. It still does in masajid and so forth. But it was a great symbol that dhikr was at the center of people's religiosity, of people's ibadah, and so forth. And it was definitely something that we saw more of among elders, and we see less of among younger people. So it's something that needs to be revived. Now, and I didn't arbitrate from a fiqh point of view all of some of the issues around dhikr, but I will when it comes to the question of the sibha. Because for me, on that issue, there's not a shadow of a doubt in my mind that this is not a bid'ah. For the simple, and I use a simple principle to make sense of that, which is that anything that is not the worship itself, but is used as a means to facilitate the worship, normally, unless it is somehow haram in and of itself. But if it is used to facilitate an act of worship, it is not a bid'ah. And furthermore, I mean, putting aside perhaps questions of chains of transmission and authenticity and so forth, there are narrations that report that some of the Sahaba used to use date seeds and things like that to count large quantities of uh, of of invocations of say a particular dhikr, right? Which is exactly what people do with the subhan. But as a general rule, so my kind of most common example is um, if you consistently rely on your alarm clock to get up for Fajr, right? And you literally you can't do it without it. It's become such a habit that it's become part and parcel of your waking up routine. Because the old natural habits of sleeping at a particular time and then waking up at just before dawn when you know um, uh, at the sound of the khafr in the morning and so on. Those kind of things don't happen, right? So people are dependent on alternatives, and those alternatives are your alarm clocks and things like that. So now that your alarm clock has become almost your ibadah, or an aspect of your ibadah has almost become dependent upon something that is new, that didn't exist at the time of Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And as such, isn't that we're using the alarm clock to wake up for Fajr is an innovative measure, right? But the reason why this doesn't fit the definition of bid'ah is because using the alarm clock to wake up is in and of itself not a part of the ibadah. It has nothing to do with the ibadah, but it is a means to facilitate the ibadah. And such things that are used as a means to facilitate worship are not or cannot be a bid'ah. Does that make sense? Usually, bid'ah involves innovation in the act of worship itself. Innovation in the act of worship itself. And there are other conditions, but at least this is one useful way to settle it. And this is why, for example, it was the Sahaba didn't consider it a bid'ah to develop new areas of learning, to, for example, uh, um, to innovate and um, and compile or codify Arabic grammar to facilitate learning Arabic, so that people who are foreign could learn Arabic easily and understand the Quran. Right? It was unprecedented at the time of the Sahaba. Most of the Islamic sciences in their current form were the Sahaba didn't use them in that way. The Sahaba did not learn the way the way we learn Islam, right? Because there was a natural process for them. The Prophet ﷺ was the authority, and they were able to pretty much take the teachings directly from him. Whereas for us, we 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 collapse the distance, the 1400-year distance between us and the Prophet ﷺ by relying on um, various methods by which we learn the Arabic language, by which we learn fiqh and usul al-fiqh and ulum hadith and so on. And it is through knowledge that we collapse that distance. Whereas for the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they had the end result. They didn't have to worry about how the bread was baked, if you like. Right? They didn't have to worry about the tree and how to plant the seed and grow the tree and wait until the tree is grown, right? Because the tree was already there bearing fruit, and that was the Prophet ﷺ. So the process is different, and often the means by which an objective such as worship is achieved isn't normally, or rather that it cannot be deemed to be a bid'ah, right? Usually it is an innovation in the worship itself, in the act of worship itself, that would be deemed a bid'ah. Anyway, so enough of that. Another thing I want to speak about is often when ulama write about dhikr, there is a tension between people who engage in knowledge and people who engage in ibadah, right? And this tension is, it's an old tension, right? And I'll give you an example of it. Um, let me find it. there was yes. So uh, Abu Sawar al-Adawi was in a gathering in a halaqah where people were discussing knowledge, right? Um, so they were talking about halal and haram and masail and things like that. There was a young man among them who said, you know, say Subhanallah, say Alhamdulillah, meaning for the young man, all this intellectual discussion about ilm, about knowledge, and about halal and haram and things like that, didn't quite meet the requirement of the remembrance of Allah Subhanahu wa Taala. For him, dhikr needed to be tasbih and tahmeed and la ilaha illallah and subhanallah and alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, and things like that. For him, that was dhikr. And so he kind of corrected the majlis, basically, by saying, say subhanallah, say alhamdulillah. So Abu Sawad got angry and he said, woe unto you, what do you think we were doing all this time? Right? What do you think we were doing all this time? And so on. And Imam Ahmad narrates this. So, and Abu Sawar was basically one of the Salaf. And the reason why I mentioned this story is to just make the point that this tension existed, like as early back as far back as the Salaf. And almost most tensions are created because of the different human dispositions. Human beings naturally, one person inclines towards one thing, the other person inclines towards another. This person feels this is really, really important. The other person feels this is really, really important. They kind of retrospectively, which often happens, once they've established their own disposition and their own leaning, they retrospectively then rationalize their own what they feel inclined towards, and then argue based on their own rationalization. Does that make sense? So effectively, it's like your effective people are then making a case, making an argument for themselves, because what they find easy or what they incline to, what they like or what they prefer is more a part of themselves. And often this is most differences happen in this way, right? People's own inclination. The truth is that it's true that all of that is dhikr, right? And there's really no need for any kind of attention, even though these moments of tension exist. And they exist today. You'll find that people who tend to be really, really strong when it comes to ibadah, there is almost a consistent pattern, right, that they're weak in knowledge. And whereas the people who really, really push on the knowledge side, right, their ibadah isn't as strong as the others. Now, so to what extent is this a problem? It goes without a shadow of doubt. I think it goes without saying that people who are able to balance the two, right, are the people who probably manage to realize some sort of an ideal, right, in terms of knowledge and in terms of the dhikr that is more invoking the words taught by Allah and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, your subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allah akbar, astaghfirullah, the salawat on the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, as opposed to a more intellectual form of dhikr. So if you like, dhikr can be separated into different categories, right? One category would be discussing the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the different facets of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, His names, His attributes, His signs, etc., as a way of strengthening one's iman, as a way of affirming one's iman, and providing support for one's iman. In today's age, it could be that in order to do that, you discuss aspects of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes by discussing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's creation, but almost in a way that using some of the things that science has revealed to us. for example, or some of the things that we know about Allah's creation, animals that we never knew existed, and so on, using that to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is a form of remembrance. Then the other is more formal, kind of through more formal seeking of knowledge. That is a form of remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that would vary depending on which subject area. So engaging in, for example, seeking knowledge in the Quran is not exactly the same as seeking knowledge in the Hadith, which is not exactly the same as seeking knowledge of fiqh, which isn't exactly the same as seeking knowledge of the Arabic language, and so on and so on. All forms of dhikr in the broader sense, but all somewhat different. They're all somewhat different. Then there is seeking knowledge in the halal and haram. Seeking knowledge in the halal and haram, which is a particular part of fiqh. Because in fiqh we study both the halal and the haram, the fard and the wajib, the makruh and the mustahab, and so on. Meaning that in terms of grading, the importance isn't all the same. Some things are fard and with its opposite, which is haram. So that this would fall into the obligatory category. Other things fall into the optional category. That which is obligatory to know, if you didn't know of it before, it's obligatory to know that. So in that sense, this particular category of dhikr becomes fard. Right? This particular form of remembrance through seeking knowledge is obligatory remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, in the broader sense. Right? And as such, it probably would be the most important because it has the most immediate practical implication. Like you don't know how to, salah is obligatory upon you, you don't know how to pray, for example. Right? So then that becomes obligatory. And then you have remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala using specific invocations like subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu akbar, and so on. Right? These fall under the mustahab category, and as such, sometimes ulama make the case, and there are many stories of this, right? That sometimes ulama make the case that, of course, the seeking knowledge and talking about halal and haram is more important because that involves aspects of the fard and the wajib, whereas this only involves the mustahab. However, the one thing and this tension is always there. People who are engaged in knowledge always make the excuse for their lack of dhikr in the other domain because of the fact that they're already engaged in dhikr and this preoccupies them from the other. If indeed it is preoccupying them, then I think people who are genuinely so preoccupied in seeking knowledge that they actually genuinely don't have time, right, for nafil salah, for like making those invocations and so on and so forth, for a routine of dhikr. Sometimes, like when I was growing up, I always heard the word ma'mulat, what we call like regular routine ibadah, right? In the hadith, the word hizb is sometimes used, or the word wird is sometimes used, meaning in the broader sense, although later hizb and wird became commonly used to refer to a particular prescribed amount of dhikr every day, right? Or tilawah of the Quran. I think in the context of the hadith that mentions it's your kind of daily routine of ibadah, overall. Your daily routine of ibadah. So those are your ma'mulat, if you like, your hizb. Okay? So somebody who is so dedicated, right, to learning and reading books and sitting in the majalis of ulama and sitting with teachers and so on, that day and night they're completely engrossed in that, right? And they have very little time. So perhaps they might do a basic amount of their hizb, or they might just do their fard and their sunan al-rawatib, the 12 sunan of the day, but they haven't got time for the nawafil, or they haven't got time for perhaps qiyamul layl. Instead of qiyamul layl, they're up reading a tafsir or something like that. Somebody who truly is dedicated to that level, you can probably say about that person that all of the other things that they're doing is dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore inshallah spiritually, because they're constantly filling their mind with words of dhikr, with salawat on the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, with the Quran, and with all of that knowledge, that spiritually they will remain strong, right? But most people aren't like that. Most people aren't like that. Most people are not dedicated to knowledge in that way. So actually, when most people actually just use the knowledge as an excuse to justify their shortcomings on the other front. Does that make sense? Most people are actually able to balance the two. And balancing the two is necessary. Think of your seeking of knowledge as your intellectual dhikr. So when you do a course or something like that, that is the dhikr of your brain. Does that make sense? Yeah? And think of your tilawah of the Quran, your ritual tilawah of the Quran. So even when you recite the Quran, there is reciting the Quran ritually, meaning that you recite it, you don't understand it. Then there is reciting the Quran both ritually and intellectually, which is probably what you take the most benefit from. Then there is reciting the Quran or reading the Quran purely intellectually, like the way an Orientalist might do, non-Muslim, right? But specializes in Islam, reads the Quran, needs to be familiar as part of his or her profession, needs to specialize and know everything about the Quran, know every verse of the Quran, know the historical context of every single verse of the Quran. But they're not even Muslim, right? So for them, they have a purely intellectual interaction with the Quran that actually doesn't benefit them spiritually at all, right? Another person interacts with the Quran and they recite the Quran and they're Muslim, but their interaction with the Quran is still like predominantly intellectual, in the sense that they always stop and pause on verses where there's intellectual content, right? Where they feel there's a piece of philosophy, right? Or where they feel there's a piece of law, there's something to do with halal and haram and so on. The impact of that on one's soul is very different to the person whose natural inclination might not be to pause at the verses of halal and haram, but to pause at the verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about His majesty. Allah speaks about His greatness, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about Jannah and Jahannam, and that person feels fear and hope, at the mention of Jahannam, right? Fear at the mention of Jahannam, hope at the mention of Jannah, love at the mention of the Prophet ﷺ, or the Anbiya before, inspiration at the mention of stories and so on. That is a different experience to the other person who's thinking, oh, I wonder what this word exactly means here and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to say. And let me look this up. And he looks up the word in lisan al-Arab. I wonder what the implications are if we take this meaning instead of this meaning. And what would be the implications if it was this meaning instead of that meaning? That experience is almost purely intellectual. That person in that moment, although they're being rewarded for it, and it is greatly rewarding, and it's part of the whole enterprise of knowledge. It's not spiritually as nourishing as the other person who's perhaps shedding tears and engaging emotionally with the Quran, because they're pausing when verses are talking about Jannah, Jahannam, when verses are speaking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're thinking about their love of Allah, their fear of Allah, their veneration of Allah, their awe of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're thinking about those things, their consciousness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're taking inspiration from the verses of the Quran that speak about dhikr, for example, that speak about ibadah, that speak about salah, that speak about that. Meaning that their preoccupation is with those verses, and that's where they stop and pause. The two experiences are not the same. And people have different inclinations. And often we will find that what we are naturally inclined towards is what we actually need less of. What we are naturally inclined towards is what we actually need. If we've been naturally inclined towards something, right, it means that we're actually going to get plenty of that because we find it easy. So therefore, we have to actually stop and deliberately give ourselves a healthy dose of the other to balance it out. Does that make sense? So me, for example, my own personal experience is that my mind naturally stops at the intellectual stuff, right? Naturally, my mind, like, I'll stop, and I was just going to recite, I don't know, a few pages or something like that, but I end up spending 15, 20 minutes looking up something because I've just stopped at a verse that speaks of a particular aspect of halal and haram, and I feel as though it's not clear in my mind, right? But perhaps a verse about the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'll just read and perhaps understand it, but just read through it. Does that make sense? Whereas another person would be the complete opposite. So if your inclination is one way, then you're always going to get plenty of that, because you're just, without even realizing, you're going to fall, right? But so what I need is to force myself to pause at the other verses and think about them more, or find another way to engage that aspect of myself, i.e. the spiritual aspect of myself, because the intellectual is naturally getting engaged anyway, because I'm naturally that way inclined. So I started off talking about this tension, right? So there seems to be this tension. So the way to understand this issue and the way to kind of overcome this apparent tension is basically like that. Is to recognize that sometimes sometimes people have their own inclinations, and often when you have an inclination, it usually means that you're probably too far leaning one way and you need some sort of counterbalance. And that counterbalance needs to be quite deliberate, quite forced. Does that make sense? Because you're not naturally inclined that way. So you need to force the counter. So it's like somebody with a sweet tooth. What are they naturally inclined towards? Sweets, right? So naturally they're always, nobody has to say to them, oh, you need a healthy dose of sugar in your diet. It's like, I mean, that's a given, right? So for that person to have a healthy diet, a healthy physical diet, it's the counterbalancing of the diet with the other things that perhaps they might not feel so easily inclined to, right? Those are the things that they have to, you have other people, you have some people who don't like sugar, genuinely actually don't like sugar. I mean, most people think, look at them and they think, what's wrong with you? Right? But they genuinely don't like sugar. And the doctor has to say to them, actually, you need more sugar in your diet. Right? Some people don't like meat, and the doctor says, well, you've got to figure out a way to get protein in your diet. Yeah? And so on. So what you already like, what you're already inclined to naturally, you're getting anyway. What then becomes necessary is to balance out your spiritual diet, right, with the counterbalance, with the thing that's missing. Okay? So I'll give you that example of the Quran. When it comes to dhikr and all of that broader discussion about dhikr of the halal and the haram and dhikr of the attributes of Allah, etc., there are specific benefits to just sit alone and say Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah, and do dhikr in that way. Right? A kind of ritualized dhikr using words that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has taught us specifically to use and say and invoke, right? And the benefit of that is different to how you might benefit by sitting in a majlis and talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a different part of the diet, right? If one is protein, then this is healthy fats, right? Or omega or whatever. This is a different part of the diet, and you need all of them, and we have to find a balance between all of the different aspects of our spiritual diet, rather than creating a false dichotomy, rather than creating a false tension between them. Does that make sense? Right? So this idea of the tension basically it's sometimes created unnecessarily, and it's usually people reacting. It's one person reacting to the other. So that in that story that I told you, the Abu Sawar story, that Abu Sawar had a go at that young boy only because he decided to make a correction in a majlis where he didn't need to make a correction. That was a majlis of knowledge. Halaqahs, end of story. That needs to remain a majlis of knowledge, right? He's got to find his own counterbalance. If he feels, so perhaps some of the people in that majlis needed a healthy dose of Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, la ilaha illallah. And perhaps that young boy, he needs a healthy dose of knowledge, of intellectual knowledge. Okay? And that's how it has to be. Meaning people have to take responsibility for the stuff. They have to take responsibility to engage in some of the things that they don't normally engage in, or they don't feel naturally inclined to. Out of all of the many good things or good forms of dhikr that are out there. Okay? There's very important. Unfortunately, I haven't got anything that I can recommend in English on this. I actually, there's in Arabic, I've come across books specifically on like the concept of dhikr and how there are different forms and different types of it and how to do it. So which is why I thought, let me explain this in a bit more detail. Okay? Yes.
Oh, I'm just going to ask what are the names of the books, even though they're in Arabic?
Even though they're in Arabic.
Yeah.
I'll tell you next week.
Okay.
It's something along the lines of Nadariyat al-Dhikr, something like that. But I have it, it's in my database, and I've read most of it because I actually used it in some of my classes. But I can't remember the exact title. So I'll tell you the title and the author. Okay? In books like Ibn Qayyim Zad al-Ma'ad, and generally in some of the books that broadly cover different aspects, you will find quite comprehensive sections on dhikr. Those have been translated. Okay? So I might as well mention those. So Imam Nawawi's Adhkar, Imam Nawawi's Kitab al-Adhkar has been translated, and I believe he has a good section in the introduction explaining how dhikr works and so on. Am I right? Anyone read that? I'm pretty sure I remember reading it. He has a good section explaining how dhikr works. That has now been, there's a good translation, recent translation by Turath Publishing. Turath, Turath. Okay? And that's usually available, like in local bookshops, and it should be available in Al-Manar. Imam Ghazali's Ihya will have a good section on remembrance. Okay? And Imam Ghazali usually goes into explaining the philosophy of it and so on. Ghazali. So his Ihya is in English, translated in English, it's the revival of the sciences of religion.
So would we have to find the one on religion?
No, that one's quite big. I mean, I don't know how many volumes it is in English. I only have the Arabic, but it's several volumes, that one. Okay? But it will, in it, there'll be a chapter. Some publishers have taken different parts of the Ihya and published them separately. But I don't know off the top of my head if there is an English one specifically for the remembrance chapter. There is? Do you know if is it Islamic Text Society? So check out Islamic Text Society.
I've seen they have different chapters, like sincerity, forgiveness, patience.
That's right. So I reckon it will almost certainly be the Islamic Text Society that's published it. To take a look. And their translations are usually quite good. They usually use very good translators and editors to translate. Which I think that's enough for now. All right, there's probably others. It's just not coming to my mind off the top of my head. Okay, Charlie. And of course, you will find a good discussion in this book. Of course, perhaps I wouldn't be surprised if Imam Zayd has copied the whole of the section that I've just discussed with you in the translation of this book, which some of you have bought upon my recommendation. So who's got it? You got it? So if you can show the sister there so that she can also order it.
I took a picture.
Oh, you took a picture. So that's a good place to start. Okay? All right. So let's move on. I've spent quite a lot of time talking about dhikr, so I'm going to move on, inshallah. Or just that line, I should say. Yeah. So that line began, and be humble for the truth, right? And lower yourself for it, and continue the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you do, you will attain His nearness. And it was on the back of that point about attaining the nearness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I mentioned that Ibn Qayyim mentions 100 benefits of dhikr. So today we spoke generally about the philosophy of dhikr, right? You know, how to balance different aspects of dhikr and so on. So if continuing that paragraph, Imam al-Muhasibi mentions a hadith. He says, the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, جلساء الله يوم القيامة الخاضعون المتواضعون الخائفون الذاكرون الله كثيرا. that the companions of Allah on the Day of Judgment. Julasa implies companions who will be people whose company you sit in, because the word Julasa is from Jalasa, right, which means sitting, to sit. So the companions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment will be those who are humble, who um, uh, who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala abundantly. So just to clarify, in Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Qudda's tahqiq, where he looks up every single hadith that Imam Muhasibi mentions, he says that he couldn't find this particular hadith. And I also can't, like I have no, like I've not come across this particular wording anywhere myself, right? And my obviously knowledge of it is a lot more limited than Shaykh Abdul Fattah's. He's a muhaddith and an expert in this, and he says he couldn't find it in any of the sources that are available to him. So as such, the meaning is valid in that, in principle, in that there is great virtue for people who are who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and kind of along the lines of this hadith, this idea of closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment specifically. You can remind yourself of the hadith about those who get shade under the shade of Allah's throne, and among them is رَجُلٌ ذَكَرَ اللَّهَ خَالِيًا فَفَاضَتْ عَيْنَاهُ. Right? So is the man who remembered Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in solitude, and therefore his eyes welled up in tears, meaning he or she cried in solitude upon remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That people who, so if you were to simplify that, it basically means that somebody who remembers Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely. The whole idea of solitude is because it is unlike, if you're in solitude and nobody can see you, you're completely on your own, and you shed tears remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then it's not to show anyone. Right? It's not to appear to be pious to others, but rather there is a genuineness, there is a sincerity there. And so the benefit of that is that people who do that, they have a place under the shade of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's throne on the day on the Day of Judgment. And there are other ahadith, broadly to a similar effect. One in which the Prophet ﷺ says that if you, when you pass by the gardens of paradise, paradise, enjoy them. Right? Enjoy them. Take part and enjoy them, as though the way you might enter a garden and enjoy it. Enjoy the scene, enjoy the smells, right? Enjoy the atmosphere. Faltaru is the word. So the Sahaba asked them, what are the gardens of paradise? And the Prophet ﷺ responded, the halaqahs of dhikr, the gatherings of remembrance of the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And again, that kind of that dichotomy is also there, whereas those who generally engage a lot in knowledge, they kind of clarify further by also saying that this also includes the gatherings of knowledge. So Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, whenever he mentioned this particular hadith, the one that I just mentioned, when Ibn Mas'ud used to remember this hadith, he used to say, listen, I don't mean by this storytellers. I'm not talking about people who tell stories, but rather, by the gatherings of dhikr, I mean the gatherings of fiqh, gatherings of jurisprudence, where fiqh is discussed, which is interesting. Anas radiallahu anhu said something similar. But what's interesting about both of these companions is that they were fuqaha. Like fiqh was their lifeblood. That's what they were good at, and that's what they were passionate about. And people who are sincerely passionate about a particular aspect of Islam, they see great virtue in it. And it's like if you're a professor of a subject, right? You're almost like a salesman for that subject. Yeah, it's like if you have a professor of a particular subject, they're constantly trying to get students into that subject, and that's necessary. because because one person cannot, every aspect of the religion cannot survive inside one person. So you need those great worshippers through whom worship survives and dhikr survives, right? And then you need these great scholars through whom different aspects of knowledge survive. You know, fiqh survives through the fuqaha, hadith survives through the muhaddithun, and Arabic language survives through the lughawiyun, and and tafsir survives through the mufassirun, right? And all of these different categories of knowledge or of the knowledgeable existed among the Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'in. So the worshippers, let's just say Abu Dharr al-Ghifari radiallahu anhu, the fuqaha, right, the great fuqaha of the Sahaba, if you like, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu, Ali radiallahu anhu, right, famous for being people of judgment, people of jurisprudence. Umar radiallahu anhu didn't transmit a lot of hadith, but was known as a faqih, right? Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, Aisha radiallahu anha was also known as a faqih. There were those rare companions who were great transmitters of narrations, but were also known as fuqaha, were also known as jurists. Really prominent among them, probably most prominent among them is Aisha radiallahu anha, right? Because she was both one of the most prolific narrators of hadith as well as an important jurist who people used to consult on matters of jurisprudence. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, also a great narrator, but not as prolific as, say, Aisha radiallahu anha or, say, Abdullah ibn Umar radiallahu anhu. Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, generally referred to as somebody not devoid of fiqh, but more of being a predominantly transmitting companion, somebody who transmitted a lot of narration. In fact, he transmitted the most, right? Who have I missed out? Mufassirun, right? Abdullah ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu, Ubay ibn Ka'ab radiallahu anhu, among the Mufassirun, people who kind of were dedicated to the meaning and the meanings of the Quran and exploring all of the layers of meanings of the Quran and preserving that aspect. Everybody plays their role, everybody plays their part in the continuity of the tradition and the preservation of the tradition. Okay, so moving on. وابذل النصيحة لله وللمؤمنين وشاور في أمرك الذين يخشون الله. قال الله عز وجل إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء. وقال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم الدين النصيحة. So this is about nasiha. And be generous. وابذل, to spread generously, right? So be generous with nasiha for the sake of Allah and for the sake of the believers. Okay, and consult in your affair the people who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء, that those who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those who are people of knowledge, right? So إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. And the Prophet ﷺ said, religion is nasiha. So what is this nasiha? Right, so the first line was, be generous with nasiha. The Prophet ﷺ said, ad-dinu an nasiha. And then consult people who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The two things are connected. Because when somebody consults you, what they're asking, so if they're consulting you about a specific affair, what they're really asking is for your sincere counsel. They're asking for your sincere advice. That sincere advice is nasiha. That sincere advice is nasiha, right? So when a person is consulted, they're required to set aside their own interests, set aside their own biases, set aside what they think is right, and try to respond based on what is right for the person that they're giving nasiha. And this is why one of the most common definitions of nasiha is to want the best for your brother or sister. To want the best for your brother or sister. That is one of the most common definitions and one of the most broadly accepted definitions of nasiha. And the hadith about ad-deen nasiha, that hadith of course continues. The Prophet ﷺ, when he said ad-deen nasiha, the Sahaba said, for who? Nasiha for who? And the Prophet ﷺ then went on to explain, saying, "Dinu lillahi wa li rasulihi wa li a'immatil muslimina wa khasatih." And it's nasiha for Allah, for His Messenger, for the leaders of the Muslims, and for the general folk of the Muslims. And the idea being that the nasiha works in different ways for different people. Nasiha to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, obey Him, and be true to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nasiha to His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, for those people who were around the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, would have been to support him, to obey him, right, to follow his sunnah, and so on and so forth. And then this nasiha to the leaders of the Muslims would be to obey them, to advise them where your advice can reach them, in order to correct them if they're going wrong, and to provide counsel and consultation to them if your consultation is sought. And similarly, there is nasiha for ordinary people. I'm going to move on to the next part because I think it's really useful. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ مَنْ نَصَحَكَ فَقَدْ أَحَبَّ وَمَنْ دَاهَنَكَ فَقَدْ غَشَّكَ وَمَنْ لَمْ يَقْبَلْ نَصِيحَتَكَ فَلَيْسَ بِأَخٍ لَكَ. قال عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله تعالى عنه: لا خير في قوم ليسوا بناصحين ولا خير في قوم لا يحبون الناصحين. So this is really nice, inshallah. So he says, know that whoever gives you nasiha, he has loved you. He or she has loved you. If somebody gives you nasiha, they have expressed love for you. وَمَنْ دَاهَنَكَ فَقَدْ غَشَّكَ. Okay, how do I explain this word mudahana? Right? So mudahana is when you, in order to remain in somebody's good books, don't tell them the truth. What's that in English?
Oh, sure.
Okay. So basically, right, you butter somebody up if you like. You understand what I mean? So there is a piece of, somebody has done something and something should be said. There's something that you could say. You're close enough to them to be able to say. So think of it as not quite, it isn't quite you stopping them from doing an evil that they're engaged in, which becomes amr bil ma'ruf nahy anil munkar. But rather, there is a small correction that you can make. There is a little bit of intervention that you can make, right? That would be beneficial to the other person. But because you're worried that it might not quite be to their liking, right? You're thinking, well, I don't want to risk my friendship, or I don't want to risk what I have, or I don't want to, I don't know what you might have. It could be anything, right? It could be that you stand to benefit in some way. They're a business partner or an associate with whom you have other interests associated. And because of that, an opportunity, a genuine opportunity to give nasiha, right? You ignore. So Umar radiallahu anhu is saying that anybody who does that to you, meaning they have the opportunity to give nasiha, but they don't preserve something else with you, meaning say good relationship or something like that, or to preserve your good graces, yeah. That person has فقد غش. So غش means that they have shortchanged you, right? Or غش is a fake coin, right? So if you pay somebody with counterfeit money, that is called غش. Make sense? That's what this person has done to you. If they had the opportunity to give you nasiha, but they didn't give it. On the flip side, though, people don't always take it well when you give them nasiha. Okay? So a good example of nasiha that I like, that I think people should do more of, but intelligently, is when somebody that you know, so it's very important, right? This is my word. Somebody has made a mistake in salah, or might have made a mistake in salah. So in each case, that your wording has to be different, right? Because if you in an attempt to give nasiha to somebody, you insult them, then you're no longer giving them nasiha. This is the tricky part, right? So sometimes they give somebody nasiha, and the person takes offense. And they're like, no, what's taking offense for? But then another person has been observing, right? And they have a piece of nasiha of their own to the person who gave the nasiha. Right? which is, bro, like, you were really patronizing. Like, you were really, really patronizing. I mean, you were really like putting your knowledge on the guy. Do you know what I mean? Like you wanted to show, you wanted to make the person feel inadequate about their ignorance, or about the fact that they made the mistake, or about the fact that they don't know how to do sujood properly, or something like that. Does that make sense? So nasiha isn't nasiha if it isn't in the spirit of nasiha, meaning wanting the best for the other person. So wanting the best for another person is multi-dimensional. You're not wanting the best for somebody if you're hurting their feelings. That's not nasiha. Right? You're not wanting the best for somebody if you're making them feel small about things. You're making them feel patronized, right? And this usually comes across because of what the nasih, the person who is attempting to give nasiha, actually feels. Because if you feel superior when giving nasiha to somebody else, that person will get that vibe. If you're sincere in your nasiha, it will come across as sincere. Does that make sense? Yeah? And you, naturally, if you're really interested in sincerely giving somebody advice, what you're concerned about isn't that they've made a mistake. You're probably going to approach it thinking, you know what, I just saw this person do something that might have broken their salah. I really don't want them to not know. Right? It's one of those things that they can easily rectify. Do you understand? I should let them know. Which probably means you're going to approach it almost quite apologetically. I'm really sorry. I hope you don't mind. But I just thought I'd point out the fact that, you know, your trousers are torn or something like that, or you've got, you have a lot of people kind of, you know, their salah actually breaks because their trousers push down, men in particular, right? Their trousers, they kind of go too far down when they go in sujood. They don't realize it. You understand? So it's to say that to somebody, to go and put that across to somebody is almost embarrassing. Do you understand? But you feel you have to, so that the person might know. Now, that requires a really, really heavy dose of sensitivity and almost kind of coming across quite apologetic and so on, but can somehow getting the message across and constantly saying, look, I'm really sorry and I don't want to make you feel inadequate and so on. If in that context you go and say, yo, brother, you know your bum crack was showing. The guy's gonna quite rightfully want to punch you in the face. You know what I mean? And people do that. People sometimes take great joy out of correcting somebody else and making a mistake and making them feel great about it. So, and then if the other person gets angry and they're like, what you do, you know, like, you're a rude or something like that was really nasty. They'll be like, bro, I'm giving you a nasiha. So this is the thing. So people do all sorts of weird. So and obviously he might have read Risalat al-Mustashidin and he might turn around and say, see, there's no good in you. There's no good in you because you don't like nasiha. And Umar radiallahu anhu said that. She said, this is the thing. So anyway, so that's how this statement from Umar radiallahu anhu finishes off, right? So whoever doesn't give you nasiha to please you, then that person has deceived you, if you like, or shortchanged you. Whoever does not accept your nasiha is not your brother, right? من لم يقبل نصيحتك فليس بأخ لك. And then sorry, this is al-Muhasibi saying. So know that whoever gives you nasiha has loved you. Whoever avoids it has deceived you. Whoever doesn't accept your nasiha is not your brother. And then is the statement of Umar radiallahu anhu, where he says that there is no good in a people who are not nasih, laysu binasihin, who are not givers of nasiha. And there is no good in people who do not like the givers of nasiha. Does that make sense? So if you're in the moment that you're a giver of nasiha, you have to do it delicately and sensitively. And when somebody does give nasiha, even if it does come across a bit, you know, weird or strange, a little bit patronizing and so on, then you try your best to swallow your pride and accept it anyway and just say Jazakallah and thank you. Sometimes people are wrong in their nasiha. Right? They tell you did this wrong, and it's wrong according to the Hanbali method, not in the Hanafi method. that makes sense. But they're insisting. No, but there's a hadith. There's this and the other. So in that situation, you just have to say, look, I know, I like, I'm okay. Thank you, because you can just accept it, right? Okay, thank you very much. You know, for informing me. Jazakallah. And off you go. That makes sense. You don't have to get into an argument. Nasiha doesn't have to lead to an argument. Somebody, you just have to read the person's intention. What's the person's intention? They think you've made a mistake in salah, right? And they're telling you, and you say, no, but I know it's correct. And they're like, no, but this, that, and the other. So you're like, okay, but at the end of the day, he's trying to correct me. Maybe he follows a different opinion. So you just accept the nasiha. Right? That's it. You just accept the nasiha. End of story. Okay. So that's